It was the sort of evening where the rain clung to the window panes like forgotten tears, melancholy, slow, and soundless. The grand halls of the Ashcroft Museum of Antiquities stood silent and solemn, sheltering its centuries-old secrets beneath polished glass cases and dim chandeliers. Outside, the streets of Bloomsbury shimmered wetly beneath gas lamps, and inside, a corpse lay slumped beside a shattered Grecian amphora in Gallery B. The body belonged to Dr. Marcus Hardcastle, the esteemed curator of the Ashcroft, a man as rigid in bearing as the marble busts he guarded. His death was sudden and theatrical, a slender antique dagger driven cleanly into his heart, its handle a golden lion's head. Blood had pooled on the marble floor, soaking into a Persian rug that dated back to the Qajar dynasty. It was 7:22 p.m. when the night guard, a timid fellow named Alfred Sims, discovered the body. Sims had only moments earlier passed through the same corridor on his rounds. When he returned, after a brief detour to reprimand a suspicious youth loitering near the side entrance, he found the museum's alarm lights flickering red and the display case for the recently acquired Chronos tablet forced open. The tablet, a Mesopotamian relic said to contain an early record of astronomical calculation, was gone. Sims's shriek summoned the remaining staff still on the premises, including Miss Evangeline Marsh, the assistant curator, Professor Lionel Hartley, an ancient languages specialist who rented office space in the West Wing, and Lady Helena Ashcroft, the museum's patron and last surviving member of the Ashcroft line. Also present was the young and impeccably dressed Julian Vale, the museum's PR director, whose poise cracked only slightly as he stumbled backward at the sight of the blood. The police arrived within 20 minutes. Chief Inspector Garrow, a broad-shouldered Scotsman with a permanent frown etched into his brow, began taking statements. Initial theories ran wild: a botched theft, an act of revenge by a disgruntled academic, even rumors of a curse linked to the stolen tablet. Yet nothing quite added up. Dr. Hardcastle was known to be a traditionalist, a gatekeeper of the old ways, and famously resistant to digitizing the museum's records. But he was not widely hated. Disliked perhaps for his hauteur, but not hated. And why murder him during the theft, when silence would have better served the thief? Odd, very odd, muttered Inspector Garrow, scratching at his jaw. There's motive, surely, but the timing, the weapon, the location, all inconvenient. He glanced at the assistant curator. Miss Marsh, you were the last to see him alive. Evangeline Marsh nodded. She was in her early 30s, her expression somewhere between composed and shocked. Yes. He asked to see me about 6:30. We discussed the security audit. He had concerns about the tablet's mounting. He seemed agitated. And after that, I left his office shortly before 7. Garrow scribbled something in his notebook. And you, Professor Hartley? The elderly man straightened with offended dignity. I was in my study working on the cuneiform translations for our upcoming exhibit. I heard nothing until Sims called for help. Lady Helena, tall and statuesque even in grief, interjected. This is a disgrace. The Ashcroft Museum has never been the site of violence. Marcus was a dear friend to my late father. Your ladyship, Garrow began, but Lady Helena turned away. From the far end of the room, Julian Vale cleared his throat nervously. With respect, Inspector, I think we need outside assistance. This is a scandal, yes, but worse, it is chaos. The museum's reputation is in jeopardy. Garrow folded his arms. We're quite capable of handling murder, Mr. Vale. Not like this, Vale replied. This isn't a simple burglary gone wrong. This is something else entirely. He withdrew a calling card from his coat. There's someone I believe can help. Someone with a rather unique approach to matters such as these. Garrow took the card, grunted, and read aloud. Monsieur Hercule Poirot, private consulting detective, Londres. Garrow raised an eyebrow. The Belgian, isn't he rather flamboyant for this sort of thing? Vale offered a wan smile. Perhaps, but I think you'll find he has a particular talent for the impossible. And so, at Julian Vale's request, and with Lady Helena's whispered approval, an urgent telegram was dispatched. Murder at Ashcroft Museum. Theft of priceless artifact. Suspects limited. Need your expertise. Vale. Little did they know that at that very hour, in a neatly appointed flat on Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot was in the middle of an exceptionally fastidious rearrangement of his silver-tipped shoe horns. The little grey cells, he often said, needed their stimulus, and before long they would be summoned to probe the darkest corners of human vanity and ambition. The morning sun filtered through the tall Georgian windows of the Ashcroft Museum's front foyer, scattering amber light across marble floors now scrubbed clean of blood, though no amount of polish could erase the memory of the night before. A subtle hush blanketed the building, a nervous stillness broken only by the ticking of the reception clock and the creak of distant floorboards. It was just after 8 when the black cab pulled up outside the main entrance and a small, immaculately dressed man alighted, his waxed mustache gleaming, his gloves spotless, his gait precise. Hercule Poirot paused beneath the carved archway, gazing up at the museum's facade with a mixture of curiosity and distaste. Austere, he murmured to himself, but not without charm. Let us hope the murder is as symmetrical. He was met at the doors by Julian Vale, whose previously measured composure was now tempered with visible strain. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, extending a hand, "thank you for coming so quickly. We're all quite rattled. I can't say I'm surprised you arrived early. Punctuality, Monsieur Vale, is not merely a courtesy. It is a window into the order of the soul." Poirot tapped his cane twice on the floor as he surveyed the museum's grand atrium. "Now, you must tell me. Is the body still present?" "No. The coroner removed it during the night. The dagger, however, has been preserved. The police were careful not to contaminate the scene, though I believe the inspector remains skeptical of outside help." "Inspector Garrow," Poirot said with a knowing smile. "He and I have crossed paths. A man of conviction, but he places too much faith in shoe leather and fingerprints. We shall let him examine the dust, and I—" Poirot tapped his temple. "I shall examine the dust in the mines." Vale led him through the echoing halls toward Gallery B. Though the murder scene had been cleared, a soft red rope now cordoned off the area where Dr. Hardcastle had fallen. The shattered amphora had been carefully collected and catalogued, though its absence left a stark void in the display. The empty glass case that once held the Chronos tablet loomed at the far end, its lock clearly forced. Poirot observed the jagged edge of the latch, the faint impression of a footprint on the edge of the rug. And the tablet, was it insured? "Extensively," Vale replied, lowering his voice. "But its value went beyond money. It was due to be the centerpiece of next month's exhibition. Chronos, the dawn of timekeeping, a major draw for the museum. And who knew of its arrival?" Vale hesitated. "Most of the staff, I suppose, though only a few had access to the case. Dr. Hardcastle, Miss Marsh, his assistant, and the security chief. The exhibit was installed only last week." Poirot frowned. "And yet the murder took place not during a public event or a time of chaos, but on an otherwise ordinary evening, when the thief might have stolen the tablet unnoticed. Curious." They were joined then by Inspector Garrow, who greeted Poirot with a nod that bore more tolerance than warmth. "Monsieur Poirot, I trust you'll keep your deductions tidy." "I shall try, mon ami, though murder is rarely a tidy thing." With formalities dispensed, Poirot requested to interview the key figures in the case. Vale escorted him first to the East Wing offices, where the suspects had been asked to remain. Miss Evangeline Marsh was waiting in the assistant curator's office, seated stiffly in a chair with her arms folded tightly across her lap. Her hair was neatly pinned, though one strand had come loose, giving her an air of tension she could not disguise. Miss Marsh, Poirot began gently, you were close to Dr. Hardcastle, were you not? I worked under him for 7 years. He was exacting sometimes, unkind, but brilliant. You saw him yesterday evening? Yes, just after 6:30. He wanted to discuss the final placement of the tablet for the exhibit. He was very particular about angles, lighting, that sort of thing. Did anything strike you as unusual about his behavior? She paused. He seemed nervous, distracted. He asked me whether I thought all the staff could be trusted. I said I didn't know. It wasn't like him to question loyalty. Poirot tilted his head. And what did you do after the meeting? I left his office and returned to the conservation lab to finish preparing the fragment notes for the tablet's display. I stayed there until Sims raised the alarm. Poirot made a small note on the paper in his hand. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. Next came Professor Lionel Hartley. The elderly man's posture was straight, but his eyes had the weary cast of one who has seen careers rise and fall like dynasties. He adjusted his spectacles as he addressed Poirot. I cannot help you much, he said. I rarely interacted with Dr. Hardcastle beyond professional courtesies. We disagreed on many points. He was a preservationist. I believe knowledge must be disseminated, not hidden behind velvet ropes. You had no quarrel with him recently. Hartley pursed his lips. We argued last week. He was adamant the Chronos tablet should not be subjected to radiographic analysis. He believed it would damage the integrity of the artifact. I insisted that dating the piece was crucial to understanding its role in Babylonian astronomy. Poirot nodded. And where were you at the time of the murder? In my study. You may confirm it with my assistant, who left me just before 7. I did not leave the room until I heard shouting. Merci, Professeur. Lady Helena Ashcroft was last. She stood by a tall window overlooking the courtyard, dressed in mourning grey with a brooch shaped like a scarab pinned to her collar. Dr. Hardcastle was a friend, she said with dignified sorrow. He knew the museum inside and out, every artifact, every corner. He protected it with his life. Do you believe he had enemies, madame? Her eyes narrowed faintly. Not enemies, no, but rivals. Marcus did not welcome change. I tried to convince him to modernize, to digitize our records, install modern security, but he refused, said it would invite chaos. And you yourself, Lady Helena, where were you at the time? I had just arrived to collect some papers. I was in the boardroom on the mezzanine. Vale saw me come in. Poirot turned slightly toward the hallway. It is strange, is it not, that the thief would choose such a risky time to strike when any number of staff might stumble upon them. You think the murder was more than a theft? I think, said Poirot, that the theft was perhaps more than a murder. Later, as Poirot returned to Gallery B, he stood before the empty case, his expression unreadable. He bent to examine the glass once more, tracing the faint imprint of a gloved finger along the brass edge. Just then, Chief Inspector Garrow approached. We've got something. One of the rear doors, the one leading to the garden, was tampered with. We believe the killer entered that way and fled before Sims came back. Poirot raised an eyebrow. That door, does it lock from the inside? It does. Ah, Poirot murmured. Then someone inside let them in, or out. Garrow blinked. You're saying it was an inside job? I say, mon ami, that the answer lies not just in who could have taken the tablet, but who needed it to be gone. He turned once more to the empty case. A murder staged like theater, a relic removed with surgical timing, and each of our suspects hiding more than they say. No, this is no crime of desperation. This is a crime of design. And somewhere in the background of that vast and shadowed museum, a clock ticked forward by 1 more minute, toward a second crime, or perhaps toward the truth. The faint scent of old varnish and stone dust lingered in the air as Poirot retraced his steps through the east corridor, the click of his patent leather shoes echoing with delicate precision. He had asked for the full museum staff to remain on the premises, and thus far none had objected, though Poirot observed the subtle ways they now watched one another, too casually, too cautiously. The seeds of suspicion, once sown, grew quickly in enclosed spaces. In the main archive room, where faded maps curled beneath glass and ancient scrolls slept in temperature-controlled cases, Poirot found Alfred Sims, the night guard. The young man stood awkwardly beside a tall filing cabinet, wringing his cap in his hands. "Monsieur Sims," Poirot said softly, "I wonder if you might repeat your account for me, exactly as it occurred last night." "Yes, sir. Of course." Sims licked his lips. "I was doing my regular rounds. At 7, I passed Gallery B. Everything looked fine. I noticed a lad outside by the side entrance, leaning a bit too close to the walls, you know. Figured he might be casing the place. So I went outside to have a word with him." Poirot nodded. "You left through the south side door?" "Yes, sir. I wasn't gone long, maybe 5 minutes, but when I came back, something felt wrong. I heard this buzzing. Turns out it was the alarm system on Gallery B flashing red. I ran in and saw the curator on the floor. I panicked, called for help. The door you exited, was it secured when you returned?" Sims furrowed his brow. "I think so. I had to unlock it again from outside. Then someone let themselves in, or was let in, by another entrance." Sims hesitated. "There's only one other door that opens onto the gardens, but it's supposed to be bolted from inside after hours. We check it every evening." Poirot inclined his head slightly, his eyes narrowing in thought. "And the youth you saw outside, did you recognize him?" "No, sir. Never seen him before. Scruffy coat, no hat, looked nervous." Poirot's mustache twitched. "And what did he do when you approached?" "He bolted." "Curious indeed," Poirot said. "Merci, monsieur. That will be all. For now." As Sims departed, Poirot turned back toward the archivist's desk, where Lady Helena's voice drifted softly from the adjoining room. He found her in conversation with Inspector Garros, who broke off as Poirot entered. "We were just reviewing the visitor log," Lady Helena said. "Only a handful of guests had appointments yesterday, none still in the building at the time of the murder." "And yet," Poirot said smoothly, "someone was here who should not have been. Perhaps someone whose name would never appear in a logbook at all." Lady Helena's expression tightened, but she said nothing. Poirot considered the timeline again. Hardcastle met with Evangeline Marsh at approximately 6:30. She claimed to have returned to the lab. Professor Hartley was in his study. Lady Helena had arrived around the same time to retrieve papers. Vale was in his office, coordinating next month's press release. The only unaccounted movement came from Sims and from the unidentified youth outside. But Poirot did not believe in coincidences, especially not when a priceless relic and a fastidiously stubborn curator had vanished in the same breath. Later that afternoon, Poirot requested access to Dr. Hardcastle's personal office. Lady Helena agreed, though not without reservation. He was private, obsessively so. The office was austere, befitting the man. Dark oak shelves lined the walls, filled with aged folios, brittle papers, and catalogues annotated in Hardcastle's precise, angular script. The desk, carved from mahogany, bore little except for a banker's lamp, a brass letter opener, and a locked drawer. "Inspector Garros has already reviewed this," Vale noted from behind Poirot, "but he found nothing unusual." But perhaps he was not looking for the particular kind of unusual. Poirot examined the desk closely. A small dish of paper clips was off-center, something he doubted Hardcastle would have tolerated. Beneath it, faint indentations suggested the drawer had been forced open at some point. Poirot motioned to Vale, who supplied the key. Inside the drawer was a stack of letters bound by twine and a thin folder marked "Confidential, Ashcroft Trustees." Poirot set the letters aside for later and opened the folder, revealing internal correspondence concerning museum funding, legal notices regarding ownership of recently acquired artifacts, and, most interestingly, a heated exchange between Dr. Hardcastle and Lady Helena, dated only 5 days prior. In the letter, Hardcastle objected vehemently to Helena's plan to digitize the archive and outsource the museum's restoration work to a private firm. He accused her of undermining the institution's academic integrity and hinted, with rather formal venom, that he might resign unless matters are addressed internally. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Conflict, motive, pressure. He turned the page and found a handwritten note, slipped loose from the sheaf, bearing the curator's crisp signature. If anything should happen to me, consult the Ashcroft Index, Section D. Below that, not everything lost was forgotten. Poirot tapped the note thoughtfully. Monsieur Vale, is there such a thing as an Ashcroft Index? Vale looked puzzled. It's not a catalogue I recognize. Perhaps a legacy system. Let us hope it is not another one of Hardcastle's cryptic defenses. Poirot pocketed the note, his curiosity ignited. That evening, Poirot requested a private conversation with Evangeline Marsh. They sat across from one another in the conservation lab, the faint hum of the dehumidifier filling the silence. Mademoiselle, you knew Dr. Hardcastle well. Would he have confided anything unusual to you? Marsh hesitated. Not directly, but last week he received a letter, sealed in red wax. I saw it on his desk. Did you see the sender's name? No, but it had a foreign postmark. Greek, I think. And after he read it, he burned it in the lab incinerator. He said it was nonsense, but he seemed shaken. Poirot leaned forward. Mademoiselle, do you know what the Chronos tablet was rumored to contain? She blinked. Ancient Babylonian notations, a primitive calendar. Poirot smiled faintly. And also, according to fringe scholars, a formula used to calculate celestial conjunctions, a method which, in the wrong hands, might be reinterpreted or misrepresented as prophecy. Marsh frowned. You think someone stole it for superstition? None. I think someone stole it to control the narrative of history, and someone else tried to stop them. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. It was Inspector Garrow, his face unusually pale. There's been a development, he said. We found Professor Hartley unconscious in his office. Someone struck him on the back of the head. Poirot rose immediately. And was anything taken? No, but there was something left. He led them swiftly back to Hartley's room, where the professor now lay on a chaise under a heavy blanket, tended to by the museum's physician. Garrow pointed to the desk, where a single object had been placed deliberately beneath the lamp, a shard of the missing Chronos tablet, its surface etched with cuneiform characters. Poirot moved toward it with quiet intensity. Mon Dieu, he whispered. So it is not gone, it is being hidden. Piece by piece. He turned toward Garrow. This was not a theft. It was a surgical removal, and now someone fears the professor has gotten too close. But why would they attack him now? Garrow asked. He's harmless. Because, mon ami, Poirot replied, eyes gleaming. He is not harmless. He knows something, perhaps even without realizing it. Poirot turned to Lady Helena, who had just arrived, pale and stricken. I must ask you, madame, who else had access to the museum's old vaults? The vaults? She echoed. No one. They were sealed after the war. Even I haven't opened them in years. Poirot looked again at the shard of the tablet, resting silently beneath the lamplight. Then it is time we reopen them. Poirot descended the narrow staircase with careful deliberation, his hand gliding lightly along the cold iron railing. The air grew damp and musty as they approached the museum's old sub-vaults, a relic of the original structure, long sealed and seldom spoken of. A sharp scent of lichen and mildew filled the corridor, disturbed now by intrusion after years of stillness. Behind him, Inspector Garrow held a torch, its beam slicing the gloom, and Lady Helena trailed uneasily, her gloved hands knotted in front of her. The door to the vault stood before them, thick oak reinforced with rusting iron bands. A heavy chain had once bound it shut, now neatly sliced through, not recently, but not long ago either. The edges were dulled but not corroded, as if a bolt cutter had done the work within the past fortnight. Poirot bent low, examining the remnants of the chain. "It appears, madame," he murmured, "that your sealed chamber has been opened more recently than you were aware." Lady Helena's breath caught faintly in her throat. "That's impossible. I would have known." "Would you?" Poirot straightened and gestured at the padlock, which dangled open but intact. The chain was not removed entirely. A clever detail. Someone wished for the illusion of disuse to remain unchallenged. He nodded to Garrow, who pushed the door open with a groan of old hinges. Dust exploded into the passageway, and the torchlight flickered against the interior walls, bare stone lined with rows of wooden crates and metal cabinets, their labels faded beyond recognition. A sharp scent of oil and old wood filled the air. Poirot stepped inside, his eyes narrowing as they adjusted to the low light. "This room," he said softly, "has not been used officially in decades. And yet—" He pointed to a footprint in the dust, half-smeared, modern in shape, the tread consistent with a work boot. Another near it overlapped slightly, smaller, narrower, possibly a woman's. Poirot crouched and touched the edge gently. "Two people," he said. "At least. They came here recently, and more than once. Look at the pattern. The dust is disturbed, yes, but the imprint is faint. It has settled again. They returned multiple times." Garrow exhaled, uneasy. But what were they looking for? Poirot did not answer. He moved toward a stack of crates in the far left corner, one marked with a faded Ashcroft Institute crest and a number, D14. His eyes glittered. "The Ashcroft Index. Section D." Lady Helena stepped forward sharply. "You think the clue Hardcastle left points here?" "I do not think," Poirot murmured. "I know." With a delicate motion, he lifted the lid of the crate. Inside, wrapped in oilskin and linen, were several thick folders bound with ribbon, each bearing a different catalogue number. Poirot pulled out one and opened it. Inside, yellow documents, sketches, field notes, even a black-and-white photograph showing a fragment of the Chronos tablet still embedded in a mound of sand, unearthed beneath a shattered column. Poirot's brow furrowed. "Remarkable. This file suggests that the tablet was never whole to begin with. Only a portion was ever recovered." Lady Helena leaned over his shoulder. "That can't be right. We've displayed it as a complete piece for over a decade." "Then someone completed it, artificially, or misled the institution." He flipped the photograph. A scrawl in the curator's handwriting. "Fragment F, genuine, others, uncertain provenance. Do not catalogue as singular object." Poirot's voice dropped. Hardcastle knew the truth. He knew the artifact on display was a reconstruction, and likely a fraudulent one. Garrow stared. "You mean someone passed off a forgery?" "No," Poirot said slowly. "Worse. Someone fabricated a legend around it, presenting disparate fragments as a singular, mystical whole. Not for scholarly study, but for spectacle. And the moment Hardcastle threatened to expose it, he was silenced." Lady Helena's expression became unreadable. "But why would anyone—" "Ah," Poirot said softly, rising to his full height. "That is the question, is it not?" He returned the folder to the crate with reverence, then turned to Garrow. "I must speak with Professor Hartley again. Tonight, if he is able. There is something in his past, something buried like this vault, that has not been spoken of, and it may be the key to all of this." As they ascended from the vaults, Poirot remained silent, his thoughts a maelstrom. Each suspect had begun to reveal a deeper layer. Evangeline Marsh's cryptic mention of the foreign letter, Hartley's sudden assault, and now this hidden record of a deception that rewrote the museum's own past. By the time Poirot returned to the ground floor, night had fully descended. The museum, cloaked in shadows, seemed to exhale around him. In the infirmary wing, Professor Hartley sat propped against pillows, a bruise rising darkly along his temple. He looked up with bleary eyes as Poirot entered. "I was told you wanted to speak," he said hoarsely. "Only briefly, monsieur." Poirot pulled a chair beside him. "What I must ask, you may not wish to answer, but I must insist. There is more to the Chronos tablet than a mere artifact, n'est-ce pas?" Hartley winced, either from pain or the question. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "You may be surprised." Hartley exhaled. 20 years ago, when I first began collaborating with Dr. Hardcastle, we were part of a private expedition, unofficial and technically unsanctioned. In Anatolia, we discovered something buried within a collapsed ziggurat, a stone slab covered in Proto-Babylonian script, but not all the markings matched the expected dialect. He closed his eyes. Hardcastle believed it to be a relic tied to a long-lost astronomical sect. I believed it was a modern hoax. Someone had interfered with it. But our funders, they loved the mystique. They demanded we create a narrative, so Hardcastle gave them one. The Chronos tablet. "And the forgery?" Poirot asked gently. "We didn't forge it, but we exaggerated. Reassembled it for public display. It was half history, half theatre." Poirot was quiet for a long moment. "And recently, did Hardcastle intend to expose the truth?" Hartley nodded. He couldn't stomach it anymore. Said the museum had become a stage, not a sanctum. Who else knew of this deception? Hartley hesitated. Vale. He helped coordinate the exhibit and, he faltered. Lady Helena, she was director at the time, approved the launch. Poirot stood slowly. "Merci, Professor. Rest now. You have helped more than you realize." As he stepped into the hallway, Poirot felt the pieces begin to settle. Hardcastle had threatened the story that gave the Ashcroft Institute its mythic prestige. And someone, perhaps more than one, stood to lose everything if that truth emerged. Just as Poirot turned toward the main gallery, he spotted movement. Evangeline Marsh, slipping quietly down the hallway toward the rear entrance. She wore a long coat, and beneath it, something bulky bulged at her side. Poirot followed, silent and swift, careful to keep to the shadows. She entered the conservation lab and shut the door behind her. Poirot waited 10 seconds, then opened it without a knock. Marsh spun around, startled. "Monsieur Poirot." "You're working late," he said mildly. "May I ask what occupies you?" She glanced at the table, where a canvas-wrapped bundle lay, half unrolled. Inside, the unmistakable glint of stone. Poirot stepped forward. "You found another fragment." "I didn't steal it," she said quickly. "I found it in the archive drawers, behind the textiles, wrapped like packing material. I think it's the central piece." "And why did you not bring it to me?" Her expression hardened. "Because I didn't know who to trust." Poirot gave a small nod. "Wise, but misguided. It is not in hiding that the truth flourishes, mademoiselle. It is in the light." She looked away. Poirot turned toward the bundle. The fragment was larger than the others, heavier, etched with more detailed script. And at its base, unlike the others, was something new. A symbol carved not in the ancient style, but in modern tooling. A monogram, a capital 5, beneath a stylized torch. Poirot's eyes widened. "Mademoiselle," he said softly, "it appears we are closer to the truth than I imagined." Poirot studied the monogram, his fingertips barely grazing the chiseled letter. The V, elegantly carved but clearly modern, was unmistakable, and the stylized torch beneath it sent a flicker of recognition through his mind. He had seen that emblem once before, on the stationery in Victor Vale's office, embedded subtly in the watermark. "Curious," he murmured. Evangeline stood tense beside him. I wasn't sure if it was real. I thought maybe it was some kind of mark used by the restorers, but Poirot shook his head gently. "No, mademoiselle. This was not meant for documentation. It is the signature of the creator, or the manipulator. And in this case, it tells us precisely who handled this fragment." "Victor?" Her eyes widened. "Indeed. It appears Monsieur Vale did more than oversee the logistics of the Kronos exhibit. He may have curated the truth, so to speak." Poirot's gaze lingered on the fragment. The carving, though subtle, was no amateur's effort. Vale was known for his exquisite craftsmanship. His early career had been in artifact restoration before he turned to museum administration. Most had forgotten that. Poirot had not. "Mademoiselle," he said, folding the linen over the fragment once more, "we must return this to the main archive and ensure it is secured. But before we do, there is a question you must answer." Evangeline nodded. "Why did you not reveal its existence to anyone until now? You say you found it hidden, but how did you come to search that particular drawer?" She hesitated. "I overheard Professor Hardcastle speaking with someone the night before he died. I stayed late, working on the lighting rig above the mezzanine, and I heard voices echoing through the atrium. I couldn't make out everything, but he said something like, 'You'll regret burying it. The fragment has your name etched into it.' I assumed it was metaphorical. Until now." Poirot tilted his head. "And the other voice?" "I think it was Vale's. It was firm, angry. And when I went down later, the conservation room door was open, but no one was there. I think Hardcastle must have left the fragment out, and Vale took it. Hid it." Poirot pressed his fingertips together, or returned it to where it had once been hidden. They left the conservation lab in silence. Poirot carried the fragment himself, cradled in both hands. He returned it to the archive under Garrow's supervision, ensuring it was photographed, sealed, logged. He gave no indication of its peculiar marking, nor the implications it carried. That revelation, he knew, would come in due time, at the right moment, with all the players assembled. Back. In the drawing room, now repurposed as a temporary nerve center for the investigation, Poirot requested that Lady Helena summon Victor Vale for a private conversation. When the tall, immaculately dressed man entered, his expression was composed, even courteous. "You wish to see me, monsieur?" "Oui, Monsieur Vale." "Please sit. I have questions regarding the Kronos tablet and your role in its restoration." Vale's brow furrowed. "I was the project coordinator. I handled the logistics, the budgeting, and media. Restoration fell under Dr. Hardcastle's direction. Yet you have experience in artifact restoration yourself, do you not?" The corner of Vale's mouth tightened, almost imperceptibly. "That was years ago. I've not handled tools since my graduate days." Poirot's gaze remained fixed on him. "Forgive me, but I find that difficult to believe. The fragment we recovered tonight bears a mark. Delicate, deliberate, etched in a manner consistent with the hand of someone both trained and cautious." Vale's expression did not change, but a flicker of calculation passed through his eyes. "I don't know what you're implying. Let me clarify. I believe the Kronos tablet was not simply restored. It was assembled, and the myth around it curated just as carefully. Tell me, Monsieur Vale, was the truth not compelling enough for you?" A pause. Then, if I embellished the narrative, I did so for the good of the museum. It's not uncommon in this industry. Romance, mystery, aura. These things matter. Poirot's voice grew sharper. But when Dr. Hardcastle refused to continue the deception, when he decided to speak out, did that make him dangerous to your vision? Vale stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. If you have any evidence to support these accusations, I suggest you produce it." Poirot stood too, calm and poised. "Monsieur Vale, I do not accuse. I observe, and I ask." But Vale was already moving toward the door. "Then observe what you will. I have nothing more to say." When he was gone, Poirot returned to the hearth, staring into the dying embers. Garrow leaned against the wall nearby. "You think he did it?" the inspector asked. "I think," Poirot replied softly, "that he knows more than he has said, but I do not yet believe he is the murderer." "What holds you back?" "The psychology, mon ami. The mind of the killer, it is not Vale's. Vale is vain, yes, and willing to manipulate, but the act of murder, striking a colleague in cold blood, it requires desperation, emotion. I sense something more complex." He turned toward the window where night clung to the glass like a veil. "We must speak with Miss Marsh again, and with Lady Helena. The truth, it tightens around them like a thread." Later that evening, Poirot requested Lady Helena's presence once more, this time alone. She entered, drawn and composed. "You wish to speak, Monsieur Poirot?" "Yes, madame. I require your honesty now more than ever. You knew the tablet was not entirely authentic, did you not?" She did not answer at once. Then, "I suspected. I let myself believe it was only minimal enhancement. Dr. Hardcastle told me enough to hint at discrepancies, but I never asked him to clarify." "And when he told you he wished to reveal the full truth?" Her lips parted, but the answer did not come. "He confided in you, did he not? And you, what did you do?" She turned away, her voice tight. "I asked him to wait, to consider the consequences. That was all, I swear to you." Poirot nodded slowly. "Thank you, madame. That will be all, for now." As she left, Poirot turned once more to the map of the gallery. His eyes landed on a curious marking, a service corridor that looped around the north wing, seldom used. One that passed directly behind the mezzanine rigging, the same one Evangeline had mentioned overhearing voices from. Poirot's gaze sharpened, and then came the interruption. A cry rang through the corridor, sharp, panicked. Poirot and Garrow rushed out, meeting a flustered junior archivist near the staircase. "There's been another break-in," she gasped. "The Assyrian gallery. One of the display cases. It's been smashed. Something's missing." Poirot's jaw tightened. "Show me." They arrived to find the case shattered clean through, glass littering the marble floor. The plaque read, "Fragment E, Chronos tablet." Gone. Poirot's expression darkened. He turned slowly, eyes sweeping the space. There was no sign of forced entry, no damage to the locks on the side doors. It had been done quickly, cleanly, by someone who knew the layout. Garrow muttered, "Whoever it was, this wasn't a panic move. They knew exactly what they wanted." Poirot crouched beside the pedestal. Something small caught his eye, a single thread barely visible, snagged on the edge of the broken glass. Dark blue. Not from a uniform. Poirot rose with grave precision. This is not the act of a man driven to destroy. It is the act of someone trying to complete something. The theft wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of the final move. The tension in the Assyrian gallery was thick as dust, clinging to every breath. Poirot moved with deliberate slowness, surveying the scene as if the fragments of shattered glass might murmur secrets to him if he paused long enough. The broken case lay like a corpse, its contents stripped bare except for a few scattered flecks of clay and a faint metallic residue. Garrow stood near the threshold, barking orders to cordon off the area. 2 constables posted themselves at either end of the hallway, while the museum staff hovered anxiously just beyond the rope barrier. Poirot gestured to one of the museum's custodians, a grey-bearded man with trembling hands. "You were here this evening?" "Yes, sir. Just down the hall. Heard the glass. Like a gunshot. Did you see anyone?" The man shook his head. "By the time I got here, it was already done." Then someone moved swiftly and with great familiarity, Poirot murmured. He glanced at the display label, Fragment E, one of 5 central pieces to the famed Chronos tablet, though its authenticity, like so much else, now lay under suspicion. The curious part was why this fragment, and why now? If the entire artifact was being discredited, why steal a portion instead of fleeing with the whole? His eyes drifted back to the tiny thread caught on the glass. Blue wool, fine in quality, perhaps from a tailored jacket or coat. He noted it with care, but said nothing. Poirot's instincts rarely latched onto physical evidence unless it served a deeper psychological purpose. This thread, however, held a quiet significance. He turned to Garrow. "Inspector, I must ask that the staff remain confined to the drawing room until further notice. No one enters or exits the museum." Garrow gave a curt nod. "Agreed. You think the thief is still here?" "No, but I believe the consequences of this act will ripple through the building like a stone dropped in a still pond. Someone will betray their knowledge, if we listen carefully." Poirot returned to the drawing room with Garrow close behind. The suspects were gathered in strained silence. Victor Vale leaned against the fireplace with clenched fists, Lady Helena perched near the window, her expression unreadable, and Miss Marsh sat alone in a shadowed corner, her hands clasped tightly. Poirot's entrance was quiet, but commanding. "Mes amis," he began gently, "there has been a further crime." Gasps followed, and then a brittle silence. Poirot allowed the tension to settle before continuing. "One of the central fragments of the Chronos tablet has been stolen, taken from its case in the Assyrian Gallery, stolen with precision, not impulse. This, I believe, was not the act of panic, but of intention." Vale straightened. "How do you know it wasn't an opportunist, someone using the chaos to snatch a valuable piece and vanish?" Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "Ah, but that would require chaos, no? And yet everything was orderly. Too orderly. A single thread was left behind. Blue wool, not uniform, but civilian. Tailored, expensive." He turned slightly, and his eyes landed, just briefly, on Miss Marsh. She flinched. Lady Helena spoke first, her voice tight. "Surely you're not implying that any of us—" "I imply nothing. I observe," Poirot said. "I observe that only a handful of people knew which fragments were which. Only someone familiar with the exhibit layout would have known how to bypass the security panels and enter the Assyrian Gallery unobserved. And, most importantly, only someone with a personal stake in the truth behind the artifact would risk everything to retrieve that fragment." His words hung in the air like smoke. Vale looked away, his jaw tight. Helena's gloved hands rested stiffly on her lap. Poirot turned now to Miss Marsh. "Miss Marsh, earlier you mentioned overhearing a conversation between Professor Hardcastle and another individual, an argument about something that had been buried. Why did you not mention that again when we spoke last?" She looked up, startled. I didn't think it was important." "Ah, but everything is important," he said gently. "And what's more, I believe you heard more than you admitted. You mentioned a torch, a mark etched in stone, details you claim to have guessed at, but I believe you knew them." Her shoulders slumped. "I didn't steal it." "No, but I believe you knew who did, or why they might." She hesitated, then said, barely above a whisper, "He was trying to fix it, to finish what Hardcastle started." She faltered. Poirot did not press. Instead, he paced slowly, addressing the room. "When one lies, mes amis, the body betrays. The eyes avoid, the hands fidget, the words tangle. But when one deceives for love, that is different. Then the lie becomes a shield, worn with conviction. Still, it cannot protect forever." He stopped near the window, looking out into the garden. "There is a truth here, hidden beneath layers. This theft, it was not the first attempt. The first was the construction of the artifact itself. The second was the concealment of that lie. And the third, this, was an act of desperation. Someone is trying to erase the past, not to protect themselves, but to protect another. He turned slowly. And that leads us to the matter of motive. Victor Vale cleared his throat, stepping forward. I had no reason to steal the fragment. I may have enhanced the story, yes, but I was not threatened by the truth. Not enough to kill. Hardcastle and I argued that's true, but I didn't want him dead. Poirot inclined his head. That may be. But the question is not only who wanted Hardcastle dead, but who benefited most by his silence. He let the thought linger, watching carefully. Lady Helena rose then, her voice subdued. Monsieur Poirot, may I speak with you privately? He gestured toward the hall, and they walked together, out of earshot. When they were alone, she exhaled shakily. I believe I've made a grave mistake. Go on, madame. She looked away. When the Chronos tablet was being promoted, I allowed certain rumors to persist, rumors that I knew were unfounded. I needed the funding, the media attention. I told Hardcastle to wait, to delay his doubts until after the gala, but he refused. And? I feared he would go public before the unveiling. I didn't kill him, I swear I didn't, but I feared for the museum, for my reputation. I pressured him, and now? She trailed off, eyes wet. Poirot took her hand gently. Madame, guilt is not always proof of crime, but it is a burden we must weigh with care. He returned her to the drawing room, then turned to Garrow. There is one more person I must speak to. Alone. He left the room and walked swiftly to the administrative wing. There, tucked away behind the finance office, was a small room used for temporary staff lockers. He knocked once and entered. Inside, Evangeline Marsh stood near her locker, startled. Monsieur Poirot. What? Mademoiselle, I must ask you to be honest now, not later. This is no longer about fragments or artifacts. A man is dead, a truth is lost, and yet I believe you hold the key. She backed slightly, but something in his tone stopped her. I didn't mean to get involved, she said quietly. But when I heard them talking, I knew something was wrong. Professor Hardcastle was afraid. He told someone he couldn't protect them anymore, that the artifact was a lie, and that he wouldn't keep their secret. Whose secret, mademoiselle? Her silence answered for her. Poirot stepped closer, his voice calm. It was someone he cared for, someone he sought to protect. Tears welled in her eyes. His daughter? It was his daughter. Poirot's breath caught. His daughter? She nodded. Charlotte Marsh, my mother. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment. And the thread? On the glass case? She said nothing. But she didn't need to. He had known, of course, from the moment he saw her flinch. But now, at last, the pieces had begun to align, not just of the tablet, but of the deeper truth behind its creation, its theft, and its cost. The fragment was gone, but the mystery was nearly whole. Poirot left the cramped locker room in silence, his gloved fingers pressed together at his lips, eyes narrowed in contemplation. The revelation had shifted the foundation of the case, not merely in motive, but in meaning. Charlotte Marsh, the woman now long absent from the academic world, was not only connected to the artifact through research or curation, she was the daughter of the murdered man, and Evangeline Marsh, the soft-spoken assistant, was his granddaughter. The implications were vast. As he returned to the main corridor, Poirot encountered Inspector Garrow emerging from the drawing room, his expression drawn. I was coming to find you, Garrow said. Vale's asking to leave, claims he's got an early train to Paris for a conference. Let him wait, Poirot replied quietly. No one leaves. Garrow frowned. You've found something? Poirot gave a tight nod. No, Inspector. I have found someone, a connection. The most dangerous kind, a secret kept for love. But now it is time to test the fabric of that secret and see who unravels when the pressure is applied. He returned with Garrow to the drawing-room, where the atmosphere had become even heavier, the air charged with dread and uncertainty. Poirot paused in the doorway, allowing his presence to be felt before speaking. "My apologies, mes amis. We are nearing the moment of clarity. I ask for your patience a little longer." Lady Helena's voice, taut with strain, rose from her chair. "I can't see how any of this brings us closer to the killer. We are being led through riddles, not evidence." Poirot bowed his head slightly. "I understand, madame. But you see, the evidence you seek is of the mind, not the hand. Let me pose a question. Why would anyone destroy a fragment of an already debunked artifact? Why steal it now, rather than before the gala, before the scandal?" Victor Vale answered bitterly. "To salvage what little could be hidden, destroy the falsehood before it was fully exposed." "Ah," Poirot said, raising a finger. "But this fragment E, was different. It was not false, it was real." The room stilled. Helena stared at him. "What are you suggesting?" "I suggest that only one person knew this fragment was genuine. The rest were forgeries, assembled by Professor Hardcastle. Yes. But this one he could not bring himself to fake. It was the foundation of the myth he had built, and he could not let it go. But it was also the most damning. A true piece, one that, when tested, would contradict the surrounding fabrication." Poirot moved closer to the hearth, drawing their attention. Hardcastle's guilt weighed upon him. He had tried to protect the legacy, for his daughter, for his family, but the unveiling would make the truth undeniable. And so he confided in someone. A final confession. Garrow asked sharply, "You believe the murder was to silence that confession?" Poirot's voice dropped. "No, I believe the murder was to protect it." He looked directly at Lady Helena now. "When you learned that Fragment E was real, madame, you realized the danger. That it would destroy everything, the funding, the museum's reputation. Hardcastle was no longer willing to protect the myth, and you were no longer able to silence him through persuasion. That's preposterous." Helena stood abruptly. "I had no reason to—" "You had every reason," Poirot interrupted, his tone firm but quiet. "You were the public face of the artifact. The museum's survival depended on its credibility. When Hardcastle faltered, your desperation grew." "I did not kill him," she said, her voice cold. "No," Poirot agreed. "You did not, but you pressured him, and someone else, someone close enough to sense the magnitude of his collapse, took matters into their own hands." He turned now, slowly, to Evangeline Marsh, who sat frozen in her chair, lips pale. "You did not mean to kill him, did you, mademoiselle? You confronted him. You demanded he protect your mother. You begged him to stay silent, but he refused, and in that moment, rage, desperation, grief drove you to act." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not speak. Poirot continued, voice softening. "You used the letter opener from his desk, a spur-of-the-moment weapon. He turned away. From you, didn't he? That is why the wound struck from behind." Her voice broke. "He said he loved us, that he had to tell the truth or he wouldn't be able to live with it." "And so you made sure he would not have to," Poirot said, almost kindly. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the drawing-room clock. But it was not cold-blooded, no. The removal of the fragment, that was calculated. That came later. You returned after the fact, perhaps even the next night, knowing what that fragment meant. And you removed it to keep the illusion intact. For your mother. For her reputation. For her memory. Garrow moved cautiously toward Evangeline, but Poirot held up a hand. "There is one more thing," he said. He crossed the room to the low side table where a stack of museum brochures lay. Poirot picked one up and turned to Vale. "Monsieur Vale, the so-called first drafts you and Hardcastle shared. One of them included notes in Charlotte Marsh's handwriting. How did they come into your possession?" Vale looked puzzled. I assumed Hardcastle gave them to me." "No," Poirot said. "You acquired them through Evangeline, didn't you?" Vale's eyes widened, flicking to Evangeline. She stared down at her lap. "She gave them to you not knowing what they would become. You used them to craft a more compelling narrative, one that exaggerated truths into myths. That manuscript, your original draft, was based not on scholarship, but on desperation to produce something unforgettable." Vale said hoarsely, "I never wanted anyone to die." "But your ambition opened the door," Poirot replied. "And Hardcastle stepped through it, then tried to shut it again, but it was too late." Garrow crossed to Evangeline now, placing a gentle but firm hand on her shoulder. "You understand, Miss Marsh, that we'll need a full statement." She nodded without protest, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Poirot stepped back, weariness briefly flickering in his expression. The case had taken its toll, on a family already broken by secrets, on a museum desperate to maintain its grandeur, on a young woman carrying the burden of a grandfather's sins. As the constables arrived to escort her away, Poirot offered a final word to her. "Truth, mademoiselle, is like time. You may try to erase it, but it leaves its imprint always." She looked at him, eyes shining. "Will they hate me?" Poirot gave the faintest shake of his head. "No. They will grieve, and then they will understand." He turned, then, to face the others. "The past cannot be rewritten, but it can be faced. That is the greatest courage of all." The house had quieted, though the silence was not one of peace. It was the taut, suspended kind that comes only after revelation. The hallway beyond the drawing room was still strewn with the tension of moments past. Poirot remained behind, even after the others had dispersed. Lady Helena had retreated in a stunned daze to her study, escorted by a concerned curator. Victor Vale had vanished entirely, perhaps to escape the accusatory weight of his role in the deception. Garrow had taken Evangeline away with a strange gentleness, as though reluctant to disturb the fragile composure she had found after confession. Poirot stood near the window, his back to the empty hearth, eyes lingering on the first signs of twilight smearing the London skyline. A reflection, distorted by the pain, stared back at him, a figure more burdened than triumphant. Footsteps approached quietly behind him. "Poirot." It was Hastings. He hadn't spoken in hours, observing the earlier revelations in a silence that had bordered on reverence. Now his voice was low, a cautious inquiry wrapped in concern. "Is it truly over, old chap?" Poirot turned to him. "No, Hastings. The performance has ended, yes, but not the story." Hastings frowned. "You mean to say you're not satisfied?" Poirot moved to a small writing desk, laying a hand gently on a closed folder labeled Private Correspondence, Hardcastle. "There is more than one truth in this matter, mon ami, and I fear we have overlooked a quieter thread, one that we must follow to its end. You don't believe Evangeline acted alone?" Poirot's expression hardened faintly. "Let me ask you, Hastings, why remove the fragment at all if she had already acted in a fit of emotion? Why not leave it, let the scandal unfold, and distance herself from it? Loyalty, perhaps. Perhaps. But let us consider the timing." Poirot lifted the folder, tapped it gently. Evangeline may have killed him in the moment, but the theft of the fragment, the deliberate destruction, was done with forethought. She is intelligent, but emotional. There is something dispassionate about the cover-up. Something else at work. Hastings nodded slowly. Another hand. "Just so." There was a knock at the drawing-room door. It opened cautiously, revealing Garrow. "She's given her statement," he said. "No resistance, no complications. Just as you said. But there's something you'll want to see." He led Poirot and Hastings down the west corridor of the manor, past the library and toward the conservation wing. The once grand hallway was now dimly lit, and Poirot noted the dusty glass cases and display drawers, some still bearing the old cataloguing numbers of long-retired exhibitions. In her confession, Garrow explained, Miss Marsh admitted to taking the fragment after the murder, but she claimed she gave it to someone else, said she was too afraid to destroy it herself. Poirot stopped short. To whom? That's the part I think you'll find interesting. Garrow produced a small key and unlocked a storage room just beyond the conservation office. Inside, under the sharp smell of aged leather and archival glue, was a fireproof cabinet. He opened the top drawer and withdrew a plastic evidence bag. Within it, a charred, broken piece of stone. Fragment E. It was found this morning by the museum's fire safety inspector, Garrow said, tucked behind the incinerator chute in the east maintenance hall. Someone tried to burn it, but only partially succeeded. Poirot took the bag and examined it through the plastic. Faint inscriptions, genuine, unmistakably Mesopotamian, still clung to its surface. She could not bring herself to finish it, he murmured, but someone else could. He turned sharply. Was anyone seen near that area last night? Garrow hesitated. Only one staff member had unrestricted access, Maintenance Director George Langley, but he's been on medical leave. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Who filled in for him? The inspector looked uncertain. One of the contracted assistants. I can get the roster. Do so, Poirot said, and his tone left no room for delay. Back in the office, while Garrow phoned the administrative wing, Poirot moved to a filing cabinet labeled Contractor Staff, 2025 Gala. He flipped through folders swiftly, scanning names. Midway through the second drawer, he stopped. Voila, he said. He held up a file marked Matthew Tullis. Hastings leaned over. Never heard of him. Nor had I. Until last night when Lady Helena mentioned a temporary technician helping with display reinforcement. I found his badge on the list of entry logs, but I had assumed him to be insignificant. Poirot's voice darkened. A foolish oversight. He opened the folder and pulled out a faded photograph of Tullis. A narrow face, blandly handsome, the kind that slipped from memory too easily. Poirot examined the employment history. A background in historical preservation, but very little traceable academic output. But what is this? He held up a photocopy of a reference letter. Signed by Victor Vale. Hastings was visibly startled. You think Vale had him planted here? I think, mon ami, that the story of this artifact, its invention, its mythos, was more carefully cultivated than we realized. Vale did not merely use the notes Evangeline gave him. He orchestrated the myth from inception to exhibition, and that required complicity. Garrow returned, holding a printed visitor badge. You were right. Tullis signed in at 8:46 p.m. the night of the murder. He logged out again just after midnight, the only non-resident to enter the conservation wing after the police left. And there, Poirot said, is your second crime. The calculated destruction of the fragment, the only real evidence that would have upended the entire academic fraud. Hastings gave a low whistle. He cleaned it up. Exactement. Tullis was not involved in the murder itself, but he was sent to ensure that the one truth, the real artifact, would not survive. The irony is exquisite, the fakes endure, and the only genuine relic of antiquity was reduced to ash. Do you think Vale knew of the murder? Poirot's mouth twisted into a thoughtful frown. That, Hastings, I do not know, but I intend to find out. They returned to the Manor's study, where Vale had at last reappeared, seated behind an enormous stack of annotated proofs. He looked up, startled, as Poirot and Garrow entered. Gentlemen, he said, blinking rapidly, I was just reviewing the museum's next publication. I thought perhaps it would be best to— Monsieur Vale, Poirot said gently, you have always valued control, of the narrative, of the artifact, of perception itself. But control is not the same as truth. Vale stood too quickly. I've done nothing wrong. I had no idea about the murder, but you knew about the fraud, Poirot said quietly. You helped build it. You hired Tullis. You guided Miss Marsh to use her grandfather's old research notes to lend weight to a discovery that never was. And when the real fragment, too real, emerged, you had it removed. Vale faltered, his face pale. Yes, I hired Tullis, but I didn't kill anyone. I only wanted the illusion to hold. It did, Poirot said. Long enough for one woman to destroy herself for it. Long enough for another to protect a ghost. That is the power of illusion, monsieur. It blinds even those who think they wield it. Vale sank back into the chair, his hands trembling faintly. Poirot turned away. The truth had been exhumed at last, layer by layer, lie by lie. And though justice would be served by the law, Poirot felt the deeper resolution stir not in the arrests or confessions, but in the quiet acceptance that followed. Outside, the sky had deepened into a velvet dusk, a time for endings, and for Poirot, a time to retreat, not with triumph, but with solemn understanding. Come, Hastings, he said softly. We have seen the past buried once. Tonight we watched it exhumed. Let us leave it finally at rest. The cab pulled away from the curb outside the Ashcroft estate, its engine murmuring into the London dusk. Poirot and Hastings sat side by side in the back seat, wrapped in a silence that neither pressed to break. The air was heavy with the aftertaste of disclosure, of a web finally unwound, yet something unsettled still fluttered in Poirot's demeanor. His fingers drummed lightly on the handle of his cane as he stared through the cab window, the passing lamplight casting fleeting illuminations on his furrowed brow. Hastings ventured a glance at him. You've uncovered the collaborators, Poirot. The deception is revealed. Isn't that what we came here to do? Poirot did not immediately respond. At last, he turned his head, eyes sharp. It is not always enough, mon ami, to expose the illusion. One must also understand its purpose, why it was needed, and by whom. You still think something is missing. Poirot tapped the glass. There is a pattern in human behavior. Like the tesserae of a mosaic, it only forms meaning when one steps back. We have been close, very close, but I begin to see the larger picture now. Hastings leaned forward, more curious than ever. Then what do? We return, Poirot said simply. One last time. There is a conversation I must have, and not with a suspect, but with a witness. They arrived not back at the estate, but at a modest town flat on Maida Vale, its exterior quiet and unremarkable. Garrow had provided the address earlier, the home of Walter Elkins, the night porter. Elkins answered the door in a dressing gown, blinking with surprise at the unexpected visit. Monsieur Poirot, he said, voice hoarse with fatigue. You've already spoken with me. I gave my statement. Indeed you did, Poirot said warmly. And you were most helpful, but there was one small detail you offered that I failed to consider properly. May we? Elkins hesitated only a moment, then nodded and stepped aside. The flat was orderly and plain, the furnishings carefully kept. A single framed photograph sat on the mantelpiece. Elkins in his porter's uniform, shaking hands with a past director of the Ashcroft. They sat together in the small lounge, and Poirot fixed the older man with a gentle but direct gaze. Monsieur Elkins, you said you saw Miss Marsh enter the conservation wing that night just after 8. That was before Dr. Hardcastle's body was discovered. But you also said something else. Elkins frowned, thinking. About Vale? Non. You mentioned you heard the service elevator running at approximately 10:30, that no one reported it being in use? Oh, yes, Elkins nodded. Odd thing. I logged it in the activity journal. Thought it might have been a glitch, but then again, it stopped on the 3rd floor. I remember because I went to check. There was no one there. Just silence. Poirot leaned back. The third floor. Not the gallery floor where the murder occurred. No, sir. Third is mostly archive storage and staff lockers. And tell me, monsieur, were the lights on when you reached it? Elkins seemed puzzled, but nodded. They were. One of the overheads was still buzzing faintly. Poirot's voice softened. It was not a glitch, mon ami. Someone used that lift, and they did so at a precise time after Evangeline Marsh had already fled the scene. They were retrieving something or hiding it. Elkins looked troubled. But who would have had access? Poirot stood. That is the question I intend to answer. Back in the cab, Hastings regarded him with open astonishment. I say, Poirot, do you think someone else was present? After the murder? Someone no one accounted for? Not after, Hastings, Poirot murmured. Before. The estate loomed dark and brooding when they returned. The air was colder now. Poirot instructed Hastings to wait as he made his way quietly to the second-floor study, where he found Lady Helena seated once more, alone and contemplative, a book resting unread in her lap. She looked up at his entrance, her expression weary but composed. Have you come for the final word, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot bowed slightly. Not a word, madame. A truth. She tilted her head. I thought we had heard enough of those this evening. Poirot walked to the fireplace, where the flames had dwindled to low embers. I do not come to accuse Lady Helena, but I must ask you to confirm something. On the night of the gala, before the guests arrived, did Dr. Hardcastle speak with you? She blinked. He did. In private? Yes. Briefly. He was agitated, more than usual. He said he had learned something important and needed to speak with me later. Poirot nodded. But he never had the chance. She lowered her gaze. No, he didn't. He took a breath. Lady Helena, when did you learn about the forged provenance? There was a long pause. Before the exhibition opened, she said at last. Weeks before, I confronted Victor about inconsistencies in the paperwork. He assured me it was simply academic shorthand. Nothing dishonest. But I pressed him. And what did you discover? That the entire tale was a fabrication. The letters, the supposed excavation, it was all a stage. Evangeline had been led to believe it was her grandfather's work, but in truth it was a scheme Vale constructed from her notes and ambition. Poirot studied her carefully. You could have stopped it. I nearly did, she said softly. But then came the press, the attention. Donations surged. For the first time in years, the Ashcroft Foundation was solvent. So you chose silence. She looked up, her eyes filled with a strange, resigned pride. I chose survival. For the institution. Poirot walked closer. And when Hardcastle realized what had been done, when he confronted you with the truth, you feared what he might reveal. I did, she admitted. But I did not kill him. I know, Poirot said simply. But you moved the fragment, did you not, after the body was found? Lady Helena closed her eyes. Yes, I found it near the stairs. I knew what it was. I thought, if it disappeared, no one would know. Poirot gave a small sigh. You see, madame, the crime was not singular. It was layered. Dr. Hardcastle died not merely because of a jealous quarrel, but because too many people were willing to protect a lie. Lady Helena said nothing. Her composure remained, but a crack of grief ran beneath it, visible only to Poirot's careful eye. Outside, Hastings paced by the car, and Poirot rejoined him without further word. Well? Hastings asked. Poirot's reply was quiet. The mosaic is complete. Now we must assemble its pieces, for everyone. Are you calling the others together? Poirot nodded. Yes. Tomorrow morning, in the gallery, it is time, mon ami, for the final gathering. Hastings tilted his head, watching Poirot's calm, determined stride. "Do you know who it is, Poirot?" Poirot gave the faintest smile. "I know, Hastings. I know not only who, but why, and that is the only truth that matters." The morning air in the Ashcroft Gallery was hushed, dense with a tension that seemed to hang from the vaulted ceilings like invisible cobwebs. Outside, the early London fog rolled in thick from the Thames, muffling the world in grey. Inside, the familiar, glimmering exhibits stood like silent spectators to the drama about to unfold. The central rotunda had been cleared of visitors for the day at Poirot's special request. The staff had been summoned. The suspects gathered. One by one they entered the space. Evangeline Marsh, pale and tight-lipped, avoided everyone's eyes. Garrow followed her, calm as ever, though his habitual smirk was notably absent. Lady Helena, striking in mourning black, walked with the firm elegance of a woman both defeated and defiant. Walter Elkins lingered nervously at the back, as if unsure he belonged in such company. Dr. Vale arrived last, shoulders squared, jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of betrayal. Poirot stood in the center, immaculate as ever. The faint shine on his patent leather shoes gleamed in the filtered sunlight pouring through the stained glass skylight above. Hastings, seated discreetly off to the side, watched the great detective with a kind of reverent anticipation. He knew that look in Poirot's eye, the one that said the moment had come. "I thank you all for being here," Poirot began, his voice soft but commanding. "It is not pleasant, this business of death. But justice, mes amis, demands clarity, and today we shall have it." He turned slowly, making eye contact with each person. "We are gathered not only to identify the person who struck Dr. Julian Hardcastle, but to understand why he had to die. Because this was not a crime of impulse. No, it was a crime meticulously arranged. And to unpick it, we must return to the beginning." He walked toward the edge of the marble floor, where the Mesopotamian artifact display glimmered in its protective glass. Dr. Hardcastle had uncovered something, a truth buried beneath a mountain of ambition and desperation. He knew that the so-called Ashcroft fragment, centerpiece of this exhibition, was not what it appeared, that the provenance had been fabricated, that Miss Marsh had been deceived into thinking her grandfather's work had survived. But what he did not yet know was who was behind this elaborate deception. Evangeline's breath caught audibly in her throat. Poirot turned to her gently. "You are the innocent, mademoiselle, the linchpin of a scheme whose emotional weight gave the artifact legitimacy. Your faith in your grandfather's legacy made it real to the public, to the press, but you were used." Garrow made a soft noise of protest, but Poirot silenced him with a raised hand. "Mr. Garrow, your duplicity is clever, but not invisible. You curated the narrative with remarkable skill, weaving historical fiction into institutional fact. You told Miss Marsh what she longed to believe. You allowed the myth to bloom, because the Ashcroft was failing, because you believed a small lie in service of survival was justified." "I never wanted anyone harmed," Garrow said, his voice suddenly hoarse. "It was only meant to help the Foundation." "And yet," Poirot said coldly, "a man is dead." He turned next to Dr. Vale. But Garrow was not alone. "Were you Dr. Vale?" Vale met his gaze, face hard. "I provided the initial analysis, that's all. I was misled like the rest." "No," Poirot said softly. "You were the architect. It was you who had access to Miss Marsh's research, to her grandfather's private field notes, documents she shared with you in trust during her internship. You used them to construct a fictional dig. You told Garrow the artifact was plausible. You told Lady Helena it was real. You made it all believable, because you are the expert." Vale's fists clenched. "Speculation." "Not so," Poirot said. "I found the original notes, locked in the Foundation's third-floor archives, hidden in a box labeled for disposal. I asked myself, why would Miss Marsh's research be placed there unless someone was afraid they would contradict the official version? He allowed the silence to settle, the implication to grow. Vale's face twitched. Even if I did adjust the narrative, I didn't kill Julian. We argued, yes, but I left. I went home. Poirot walked slowly to the center of the room again. Ah, but did you? You see, someone returned to the Ashcroft that night using the service elevator. At precisely 10:30 p.m., the lift moved to the 3rd floor. Monsieur Elkins, you remember that moment, oui? Elkins gave a startled nod. Yes. I went to check. No one was there, just the overhead buzzing. Because the visitor had already gone, Poirot said. Down a side stairwell, quiet and unnoticed. They were there to retrieve something, but what? Not the fragment that had already been moved. No, they retrieved the forged letter, the one tying the Ashcroft fragment to Miss Marsh's grandfather. It would have been damning if found. Vale's face had gone white. You went back, Dr. Vale, Poirot said, because Julian threatened to expose you. He confronted you earlier that day. You realized that if he spoke to Lady Helena, or worse, the press, the entire exhibition would be discredited. Your reputation, your career, it would be over. You can't prove I killed him, Vale said through gritted teeth. You have no evidence. Poirot raised a single finger. Evidence? Ah, the English obsession. But I am not the police. I do not need fingerprints or a weapon. I have the truth. I have logic. Consider this. The angle of the blow, the height. Dr. Hardcastle was taller than you, but not much. He turned his back to you, trusting you were gone. You struck him at the top of the stairs. The fragment was nearby, used in the heat of the moment, and afterward you panicked. You removed the forged letter. You left Hardcastle where he lay, assuming someone else would discover him and confusion would reign. Vale looked about to speak, but Poirot raised his voice slightly. You allowed suspicion to fall on Miss Marsh, knowing her emotional collapse would delay inquiry. You even let suspicion land briefly on Garrow and Lady Helena, because they too had motives, didn't they? And you counted on that. You counted on everyone's desire to bury the scandal. The gallery had gone silent. Vale's mouth opened and closed once, then again. Finally, the facade cracked. I didn't mean to kill him, he said quietly. I just wanted to scare him. He wouldn't stop. He was going to ruin everything. Poirot gave a slow nod. Oui. And so, to protect a lie, you committed a far greater crime. 2 security guards, previously stationed by Poirot's instructions near the corridor, stepped forward. Vale did not resist as they approached. As he was led away, Lady Helena stood rigid, face like carved marble. Poirot turned to her. Madame, the lie might have saved the Ashcroft temporarily, but now it must find its true legacy and truth, in Miss Marsh's work, in integrity restored. Lady Helena gave a slow nod, her voice low. It will. Poirot glanced at Evangeline, whose eyes shimmered but did not break. She looked at him with something between sorrow and gratitude. Outside, the fog had begun to lift. As Poirot and Hastings made their way down the steps of the gallery, the latter finally exhaled. I say, Poirot, that was rather masterful. Poirot gave a faint smile. The truth, Hastings, is always masterful. It merely requires a stage and a detective willing to listen to the psychology behind the crime. And now? Now, Poirot said, adjusting his cuffs with meticulous care, we allow justice to do its part, and perhaps we have earned a quiet dinner and a well-brewed tisane. They stepped into the waiting cab, the door closing behind them with a decisive click, and the Ashcroft gallery faded from view, its secrets laid bare at last. The cab trundled through the waning afternoon, its windows streaked faintly with condensation. London, restored to motion after the morning's fog, bustled with that particular rhythm of early evening. Poirot sat upright, hands folded precisely atop his silver-handled cane, while Hastings leaned slightly against the window, his brow furrowed in that way that meant questions were coming. "Well," Hastings said after a stretch of silence, "I must say, I'm still not sure how you saw through Vale so decisively. Garrow and Lady Helena, they both had more obvious reasons, didn't they?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Ah, but you see, mon ami, motive is only the first thread in the tapestry. One must observe how it is woven. Consider this. Lady Helena's desire to protect the gallery could have led her to desperation, yes, but murder? No. She holds too tight to the veneer of propriety. And Garrow, while ethically flexible, lacks the steel required for such a violent act. He is, how do you say, a man of appearances. And Vale." Poirot tapped his fingers lightly. "Vale, however, is a man of consequences. His entire career has been built on unchallenged expertise. The fear of exposure, of losing control, was intolerable to him. His psychology, Hastings, was most telling." Hastings nodded, though he still looked puzzled. "Still, how did you know about the forged letter being the true goal that night?" "It was not what was found that mattered. It was what was missing. The drawer in Hardcastle's office had been disturbed, and yet nothing valuable was apparently taken. I inquired discreetly with the staff about a folder of original correspondence. Vale would have known that Hardcastle had evidence of the forgery. He did not act to gain Hastings. He acted to erase." They were silent for a moment more before Hastings said, "Do you think Miss Marsh will remain at the foundation?" Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "Perhaps. She is young, but formidable beneath her grief. It is often the disillusioned who become the fiercest keepers of truth." As the cab pulled up outside Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot stepped out with his usual crispness, nodding to the driver with courteous precision. Hastings followed, and the two ascended the steps to Poirot's apartment. Inside, the little flat was just as immaculately ordered as ever, every cushion fluffed, every item placed exactly so. Miss Lemon had left a neat stack of correspondence by the writing desk, alongside a pot of fresh orchid tea. Poirot poured himself a cup, then motioned for Hastings to sit. "You know, Poirot," Hastings said after a moment, "there is still one thing that bothers me. Vale confessed yes, but he said he only meant to scare Hardcastle, that it was not premeditated. You believe him?" Poirot took a thoughtful sip. "I believe he did not plan to kill, but intent can be concealed beneath layers of rationalization. The pressure had mounted. Hardcastle threatened everything, even a single moment of rage. Hastings, when cultivated in silence, can lead to fatal acts. But wouldn't that weaken the charge, if it wasn't planned?" Poirot's brows rose delicately. "Ah, but he returned. He went back. That shows deliberation. The Crown will not overlook such detail." He set his cup down, then walked over to his writing desk, selecting one envelope from the stack and opening it with precise movements. A cream-colored card slipped out, adorned with the insignia of the British Museum. He read silently, then handed it to Hastings. "From Sir Malcolm Hargreaves," Poirot said, "a small gathering of scholars to discuss the aftermath of the Ashcroft scandal. They are calling it a Rebuilding of Trust Symposium. Will you attend?" Poirot smiled faintly. "They ask for insight into deception, not artifact authentication. It seems my reputation has shifted from detective to philosopher." Before Hastings could reply, the telephone on the hallway table rang. Poirot answered with his usual clipped elegance. "Poirot speaking." There was a pause. His expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed just slightly. Then he nodded once. "Yes, we shall come at once." He replaced the receiver and turned to Hastings. "It seems, my friend, that our tale is not yet complete." Hastings straightened. "What is it?" Poirot retrieved his coat and hat. "Miss Marsh, She is at the Ashcroft. There has been an incident." Back through the dusk they went, this time in a police car dispatched by Inspector Barnes himself, who had placed the call. The streets seemed darker now, narrower somehow, as if the city too had sensed a loose thread still fluttering. The Ashcroft Gallery loomed once more ahead, lit from within but quiet outside. Inside, the rotunda was deserted save for Miss Marsh and Barnes, who stood near the base of the central stairs. Poirot took in her posture at once, rigid, composed, but her eyes were distant. "She found it an hour ago," Barnes said under his breath. "Said she was looking for the fragment to prepare for its removal." Poirot stepped forward. "Mademoiselle, you are unharmed." "Yes," she said quietly, "but something isn't right." She led them to the Mesopotamian gallery, where the display case housing the Ashcroft fragment had been opened. The fragment lay inside, but beside it was something new. A small, folded piece of parchment. No one had touched it. Poirot motioned for gloves, then delicately lifted the note. He read its contents once, twice, then passed it to Hastings. Scrawled in a hurried but familiar hand were the words, "He wasn't alone." Poirot's lips pressed together in a tight line. "This changes things." Barnes raised an eyebrow. "You think Vale had an accomplice?" Poirot's gaze remained on the case. "It is not a question of what I think, Inspector. It is a question of who benefits from the illusion that Vale acted alone." He turned to Miss Marsh. "You said you came to prepare the fragment for removal. Who else knew you would be here?" "No one," she said. "I didn't tell anyone. I came on impulse. I needed to see it one more time." Poirot nodded slowly. "Then someone was watching, and they wanted you to find that note." Hastings looked between them. "But what does it mean, Poirot? That someone else was involved in the forgery? Or in the murder?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Or both." He turned on his heel. "Inspector Barnes, have the building sealed. No one enters, no one leaves. There is still a liar among us, and the truth, mon ami, must be coaxed into the light once more." Poirot's voice echoed lightly through the Mesopotamian gallery as the staff moved with subdued urgency under Inspector Barnes's orders. The glass display case had been sealed again, the mysterious note collected and placed under guarded scrutiny. Poirot remained still for a long moment, his eyes not on the relic, but on the room itself. The shadows beneath the tall arches, the thin crackling of old floorboards under cautious feet, the nervous glances exchanged among those present. It was not merely a note they had found. It was a disturbance in the dust, an interruption in what Vale had wanted them to believe was finality. Barnes returned with a clipboard. "We've accounted for all current staff who had access to this gallery today. Cleaners, 2 docents, 1 assistant curator. Miss Marsh was indeed the only one scheduled to be here alone. She has keys, of course." "And security footage?" Poirot inquired. Barnes gave a resigned shake of the head. "The corridor cameras have a 20-minute blackout this afternoon. Technician says it's a routine maintenance glitch." Poirot said, folding his arms. "Convenient, is it not?" Hastings, ever more transparent in his frustration, muttered, "Do these things ever fail on any other day?" Poirot ignored him, his gaze drifting to Miss Marsh, who stood apart near the lintel of the archway, her fingers lightly gripping the railing of a stair. He approached her with his usual gentleness. "Mademoiselle," he said quietly, "do you trust your memory?" She looked up, startled. "Yes, I believe so. Why?" "Because now, more than ever, we must question what we saw and what we assumed. This note, he wasn't alone, tells us less about Vale and more about someone else's need to change the story. You think someone planted it to throw doubt on Vale's guilt?" "Not his guilt," Poirot said. "His solitude." He turned, beckoning to Hastings and Barnes. "We must speak once more with those closest to Hardcastle. Not the suspects, no, Not yet, but those who observed them, those who lived in their shadows. He insisted on visiting the staff quarters where junior employees had their lockers and break room. Poirot questioned a nervous young man named Timothy, the night guard who had seen Vale pacing the hallway weeks prior, as well as Edie, the records assistant. They were frightened, yes, but not evasive. Poirot watched their eyes as much as he listened to their words. "You see, Hastings," he murmured after the interviews, "truth often lingers on the periphery. If someone seeks to control the narrative, they will not appear in it too boldly, like a smudge on glass, barely visible, but there." It was when Poirot returned to Vale's office, now sealed and under police watch, that he made a surprising request. "Inspector Barnes, might I trouble you to open the cabinet once more?" Barnes frowned. "The same drawer as before?" "No," Poirot said. "The one below it." Vale was a fastidious man, yes, but he was also proud. He would not destroy everything. Inside the lower drawer, they found more correspondence, copies of memos, handwritten critiques, archived emails printed and bound. Poirot flipped through them slowly, almost meditatively. Then he paused on one. "Voila," he said softly. It was a letter sent from the Ashcroft Foundation 2 months prior, requesting expert review of the fragment's authenticity. But it was not addressed to Vale. It had been sent to Dr. Imogen Vale, his estranged sister, herself a noted academic in Mesopotamian antiquities. Hastings leaned in. He was going to be bypassed. Poirot nodded. Or overruled. This letter is dated just 3 days before Vale's sudden shift in behavior, as noted by the staff. His temper shortened. His paranoia began. He must have intercepted this letter before Hardcastle could act upon it. Barnes let out a low whistle. So Hardcastle was beginning to doubt the fragment himself? Oui, and Vale knew his empire was crumbling, but if he acted alone, if all this was simply to silence Hardcastle, why leave this letter behind? He destroyed the forged correspondence. This he overlooked? No, Poirot corrected. Someone else left it. Barnes's brows rose. Miss Vale. Poirot's fingers curled around the edges of the letter, or someone who wanted us to think it was Miss Vale. You see, Inspector, this new narrative, he wasn't alone. Depends on us believing Vale's guilt is now diluted. But this note, this sudden reappearance of a document that undermines him further, it is a contradiction. They returned to the rotunda where Miss Marsh was waiting. Poirot asked her softly, "Tell me, did Dr. Imogen Vale ever visit the Foundation in person?" "Yes," she said hesitantly. "Once about 2 weeks ago, briefly. She said she was only passing through London. They didn't speak much, but he looked pale when she left." "And did Mr. Hardcastle know of her visit?" "I don't think so. She left quickly. I only learned who she was later." Poirot paced a small circle, his brow deeply furrowed. Then he turned suddenly. "Inspector, I believe it is time to convene once more. Not just the suspects, but everyone. Staff, trustees, docents. The gallery must be locked down for the evening. No one leaves until the truth is spoken." Hastings blinked. "What, tonight?" "Oui," Poirot said with quiet finality. "We have reached the hour of denouement. The web has been spun tightly enough. Now we must disturb it." Within the hour, the Ashcroft Foundation's central gallery was transformed into an impromptu theater. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle beneath the high dome. Under the glow of antique chandeliers, the suspects gathered once more. Lady Helena Ashcroft, composed but tight-lipped. Edward Garrow, eyes flicking nervously between Poirot and Barnes. Miss Marsh, seated at the edge, and the lesser players, Timothy, Edie, trustees, docents, each drawn in by necessity or curiosity. Poirot stood at the center, immaculate and calm. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began. "Tonight we unravel the final threads of deceit. For though Mr. Vale confessed to the murder of Gerald Hardcastle, the truth, like the fragment he sought to protect, has suffered its own layers of concealment." He paced slowly. The forged letter, Vale's creation, was indeed the catalyst, but it was not he alone who had motive. Others feared what truth would bring. One sought to control the past, not through destruction, but through preservation, a different kind of forgery. He turned suddenly to Garrow. "Tell me, monsieur, how long have you known that the fragment was not genuine?" Garrow flushed. I didn't know. Not exactly. But you suspected. You saw the inconsistencies. And yet you remained silent. Because exposure would damage not only the Foundation's reputation, but your future appointments, your legacy. Poirot pointed to the fragment's case. You told Hardcastle not to act rashly. That Vale could be reasoned with, but when you saw Hardcastle's resolve, you made a choice. "No," Garrow burst. "I never— Poirot, I swear— Non, monsieur. I do not accuse you of murder, but your silence, it allowed it to happen, and now someone else wishes to absolve themselves by spreading the blame." He drew the folded note from his pocket. This note, he wasn't alone, was planted. Not to reveal truth, but to confuse it. Poirot turned slowly, deliberately, to Lady Helena. "You, madame, wished only to protect the gallery. You turned away from the whispers of forgery, but it is not you who wrote this." He stepped toward Miss Marsh. "You, mademoiselle, did not plant it either. You are the thread by which the truth has been preserved." At last, Poirot faced Edie, the quiet records assistant, who had shrunk into her seat. "It was you," Poirot said softly. She gasped. "What? No, You saw Vale take the forged letter weeks ago. You saw his fear. You knew what he had done. And when he confessed, it terrified you. Because you helped him cover it up. Perhaps out of loyalty, or fear, or love." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't mean for anyone to die." Poirot stepped closer. "You planted the note to shift the narrative, to give yourself time, to make us search shadows, not history." Barnes moved forward, but Poirot raised a hand. "She is no murderer, Inspector, but she is a conspirator, and the law will decide her fate." Poirot turned to the assembled room, voice quiet but firm. "Let this be the last deception in a place built for truth."